February 19th, 2020, began like any ordinary morning in the suburb of Brisbane, Camp Hill. For Hannah Clarke, this morning also appeared mundane. She was helping her children prepare for school. Little did anyone know that this seemingly routine school run would culminate in tragedy. This tragedy shook Australia to its core. Thousands, upon learning of the events, pondered a singular question: how could this happen? Hannah had repeatedly sought help from friends and law enforcement alike. Why was no one able to protect her? Hannah Clarke's story became a symbol in the fight against domestic violence. It compelled people to reflect on the fact that issues of control and cruelty within the home could affect anyone, even the strongest and kindest individuals. Hannah Clarke, born Baxter, was raised in Brisbane, Australia. She was the eldest daughter in a loving family and stood out from a young age for her vivacity and strength of character. Her parents, Lloyd and Sue Clarke, were always proud of their daughter. She was energetic, determined, and incredibly attuned to those around her. Hannah grew up in an atmosphere of understanding and support. The Clarke family lived harmoniously, often spending time together on picnics or traveling. From an early age, Hannah engaged in sports and was passionate about gymnastics. This hobby not only allowed her to unlock her potential, but also fortified her character. Training instilled in her discipline, perseverance, and teamwork. In her teenage years, she became a role model for many of her peers. Hannah possessed natural beauty, yet she refused to let it be her sole attribute. Her smile, openness, and willingness to help others endeared her to everyone. Later, she began coaching younger children, sharing her gymnastics knowledge, which brought her genuine joy. However, despite her outward optimism and success, Hannah was, like everyone, a person with her own hopes and fears. She dreamed of a simple yet happy life, to build a family surrounded by love and care, to raise children, and to pursue her passions. No one, including herself, could foresee the challenges that lay ahead. When Hannah met Rowan Baxter in 2008, she was just over 20 years old. At that time, she had no inkling that this man would become the love of her life. Rowan was 11 years her senior and exuded the charm of a charismatic, self-assured man. By then, he had already concluded his career in professional rugby, having played for the New Zealand Warriors, earning a reputation as a robust and disciplined athlete. After retiring from sports, he sought his path in various fields, including personal training and the fitness industry. Their initial meetings were romantic, with Rowan actively courting Hannah, emphasizing how special she was. For a young woman yearning for love and a strong family, these relationships seemed to herald the beginning of something beautiful. Although Hannah's family supported her choice, they soon began to notice troubling signs. Yet, as is often the case, love in its early stages obscures any doubts. Gradually, the relationship with Rowan grew increasingly serious. He captivated not only Hannah, but also her loved ones, presenting himself as caring and responsible. The couple married in 2012. From that moment, Hannah's life began to change, though not in the direction she had envisioned. After the wedding, Rowan increasingly intruded into Hannah's life. He began to distance her from close friends, claiming it was better for her to spend time solely with him. This was framed as concern, but in reality, it was an attempt at control. Hannah's parents did not immediately recognize this dynamic, but soon they felt that their daughter was sharing her thoughts and feelings with them less frequently. From the outset, Rowan was a man accustomed to dominance. This manifested not only in his personal life, but also in his views on family. He believed that a man should be the leader, while a woman should follow his directives. At that time, Hannah still tried to justify his behavior, viewing it as a manifestation of strong character. After their marriage, Hannah and Rowan moved to Camp Hill, a suburb of Brisbane, to be closer to Hannah's parents. At first glance, their life resembled an idyll. The birth of children marked a significant milestone in their marriage, infusing it with joy and new meanings. In 2013, the couple welcomed their first daughter, Leah. She was a long-awaited child, and Hannah was overjoyed in her new role as a mother. She cared for her daughter with immense love, striving to create an atmosphere of happiness and security. Rowan seemed to share in the joy of fatherhood, yet simultaneously became increasingly demanding. 2 years later, in 2015, their second daughter, Leanna, was born. Now a mother of two, Hannah continued to maintain order in the home and devoted all her energy to raising her daughters. However, the responsibility for household chores and childcare rested almost entirely on her shoulders. Rowan frequently expressed dissatisfaction if things did not meet his expectations, revealing more aggressive traits. In 2016, the family welcomed another child, a little boy named Trey. Hannah loved each of her children unconditionally, She made every effort to raise them in an environment of care, love, and harmony. Despite the growing difficulties in her relationship with Rowan, she focused on her children's happiness and their future. However, with the birth of Trey, the control and pressure from Rowan intensified. He began to impose even more demands on Hannah. He monitored her time, restricted her interactions with friends and family, and even ordinary outings with the children became a source of conflict if Hannah did not coordinate her plans with her husband. His demeanor was deceptively quiet. Rowan did not always raise his voice, but his words and tone consistently conveyed that he considered himself the head of the family. Close relatives and friends noticed changes in Hannah's life. She began to communicate less frequently with her friends, reduced her sports activities, and rarely shared what was happening at home. Lloyd and Sue Clarke tried to support their daughter as best they could, but Rowan skillfully isolated her even from them. He sought to create the impression that the Clarke family was interfering in their relationship and convinced Hannah to maintain distance. To the outside world, the Baxter family appeared ordinary. They posted photos on social media where they smiled and spent time with their children. Rowan wanted their life to seem flawless in the eyes of others. Hannah devoted herself entirely to her children, striving to provide them with the best childhood possible. She played with them, taught them kindness, told them stories, and sang lullabies. In her eyes, these moments with her children compensated for any pain she experienced in her marriage. At the same time, Rowan began to reveal himself as a harsh and sometimes unreasonable father. He established strict rules that the children were expected to follow and became irritated if anything deviated from his plans. His manner of communication with the children was abrupt, lacking the gentleness they saw in their mother. Hannah often tried to protect them from their father's rudeness, but this only led to new disputes and conflicts. Despite all the difficulties, Hannah believed for a long time that she could cope. She tried not to show her pain to those around her, holding on for the sake of her children. She felt that if she remained patient and strong enough, she could overcome all trials and preserve her family. But the tension continued to escalate. Living under constant control and fear was destroying Hannah from within. She increasingly contemplated the fact that this marriage no longer brought happiness to either her or her children. Yet, thoughts of separating from Rowan seemed terrifying. She did not know how to protect herself and her children if she left him. This fear kept her trapped for several more years. Over the years, Hannah became increasingly aware that her marriage to Rowan was far from ideal. What had initially seemed like care transformed over time into total control. His desire to dictate every aspect of her life became unbearable. It gradually became evident that Rowan did not view Hannah as an equal partner, but rather as someone who should completely submit to his will. Rowan's control extended to virtually everything. Hannah could not leave the house without informing him of her destination and purpose. He monitored her phone calls, checked her messages, and even demanded explanations if she received letters or notifications. Initially, she tried to resist, but this only provoked his outbursts of anger. Rowan could lecture her for hours, accusing her of disrespect and ingratitude. Particularly difficult were the moments when Rowan resorted to open aggression. Although physical violence was not frequent, his emotional and psychological pressure shattered Hannah from within. He belittled her, claiming that she had achieved nothing in life and that without him, she was a nobody. Such words gradually eroded her self-esteem, causing her to doubt her worth. By the end of 2019, Hannah realized that continuing to live with Rowan had become unbearable. His behavior had long since crossed the line of acceptability, and the children began to notice his outbursts of anger and the tension in the home. Hannah felt that she could no longer pretend. She understood that if she stayed, she would not only destroy her own life, but also jeopardize her children's future. The decision to leave was not easy for her. Each time she began to contemplate leaving Rowan, fear would paralyze her. He had repeatedly threatened that if she left, he would take the children. "You will never see them again," he would say, making Hannah shudder at the prospect of losing her most precious treasures. These words kept her trapped, forcing her to endure. However, gradually, her love for her children outweighed her fear. She realized that they would not have a normal childhood if they remained in that house, filled with tension and conflict. In November 2019, Hannah made up her mind. She took the children and moved in with her parents, Lloyd and Sue Clarke, who had always supported her. For Hannah, this was a monumental step. She knew that Rowan would not let this go unchallenged. Indeed, his reaction was immediate and furious. From the moment of the separation, Rowan began a campaign of harassment. He called daily, sent messages, and showed up at Hannah's parents' house, demanding to meet. He pleaded for her to return, promising to change, but simultaneously threatened her if she refused. This behavior was characteristic of Rowan. Manipulation and pressure were his primary tools. Hannah tried to remain strong. She began working with a psychologist to cope with the effects of the psychological abuse she had endured for years. Her parents were her support, helping with the children and creating a space where she could feel safe. However, even this could not fully shield her from Rowan. One of the most challenging moments for Hannah was dealing with the children's questions. Aaliyah, Leanna, and Trey were too young to understand what was happening between their parents. They loved both their mother and father and asked why they no longer lived together. Hannah tried to speak to them honestly, yet gently, explaining that sometimes adults decide to live apart to be happier. It was important to her that the children did not feel guilty. Meanwhile, Rowan continued to intensify the pressure. He filed a lawsuit seeking joint custody of the children. For Hannah, this was a devastating blow. She knew that Rowan would not be a good father, especially after he had revealed his cruel side. However, the law required that his claims be considered, and Hannah was compelled to meet with him again at the hearings. Each encounter with Rowan was fraught with threats and humiliation. He accused her of destroying the family, labeled her a bad mother, and even threatened to take the children abroad. Hannah sought help from the police, but their ability to protect her was limited. Rowan was cautious. He left no clear evidence of his threats, avoiding direct physical violence after their separation. Despite this, Hannah continued to fight. She obtained a temporary restraining order, limiting Rowan's contact with the children and prohibiting him from approaching her home. This provided her with a brief respite, but did not eliminate the danger. Rowan became increasingly unpredictable. He ignored the restrictions, appeared near her parents' house, stalked her around town, and attempted to manipulate the children. One of the most distressing moments was when he began using the children as a means to hurt Hannah. He told Aaliyah and Leanna that their mother was preventing him from seeing them, trying to sow doubt and resentment in their hearts. This deeply wounded Hannah, who was striving to maintain the children's relationship with their father despite his behavior. By December 2019, the situation had escalated. Rowan was becoming more aggressive, and Hannah began to fear for her safety. It became clear to her that the threats he had previously voiced could escalate into actions. She tried to minimize contact with him, but each new encounter, whether in court or in daily life, brought her new stress. Hannah longed to start anew. She dreamed of returning to work, continuing to coach the children in gymnastics, and providing them with a happy future. Yet every step she took was met with resistance from Rowan, who could not accept that he had lost control over her. By early 2020, Rowan Baxter's behavior had become more dangerous and unpredictable. His aggression intensified daily, especially as he realized that Hannah was firmly resolved not to return. He no longer limited himself to phone calls and text messages. Now he actively stalked her, creating scenes outside her parents' house, where Hannah had moved with the children. Hannah did everything possible to ensure her and her children's safety. The restraining order against Rowan was in effect, but he frequently violated it. One such violation occurred when he unexpectedly appeared at the school playground where the children were playing. Under various pretenses, he attempted to interact with them, instilling terror in Hannah. Rowan knew all too well that psychological pressure on Hannah through the children was his most potent weapon. She lived in constant fear that he might harm them. Hannah reported to the police every time Rowan violated the order. However, the legal measures that could protect her proved insufficiently effective. Like in many other domestic violence cases, the system responded to each individual violation without considering the broader picture of escalating threats. Rowan skillfully navigated the boundaries of the law, leaving no direct evidence that could justify more stringent measures. One day, Rowan took a particularly terrifying step. He sent Hannah a letter in which he explicitly stated that he would not allow her to destroy his family. The text was rife with implications of violent actions, although he carefully avoided direct threats. This letter was the final straw for Hannah, who realized that he was willing to go to any lengths. She contacted the police again, but they informed her that, despite the overall alarming context, there were no specific grounds for his arrest. The support of her parents was a tremendous help for Hannah. Lloyd and Sue Clarke not only defended her, but also assisted in caring for the children. Lloyd often accompanied Hannah when she went out, ensuring she did not feel vulnerable. Nevertheless, even their support could not entirely alleviate the tension. Hannah felt trapped. On one hand, she had done everything to escape Rowan, yet, on the other, he still controlled her life through fear. In mid-January 2020, Rowan attempted to meet the children without Hannah's consent. He once again lurked near the school and had tried to speak with Aaliyah. Hannah learned of this later and immediately reported it to the police, but once again, no decisive action was taken. That evening, Rowan left another message on the answering machine saying, "I warned you, Hannah. You brought this on yourself." These words sounded ominous, but proving that they constituted a threat was challenging. Hannah began to share her concerns more frequently with her parents and close friends. She expressed that she felt as though Rowan was preparing for something terrible. Her friends suggested that she leave Brisbane and start anew in another city where Rowan could not find her. However, for Hannah, this was too difficult. The children were in school, she had just begun to settle in after the move, and most importantly, she did not believe that fleeing would fully protect her. Rowan, for his part, was sinking deeper into his obsessions. He felt he was losing control over Hannah and the children, which pushed him toward radical actions. Rowan's friends recalled that he often spoke of how much he hated Hannah for her decision to leave, asserting that she would have to pay for it. A few days before the tragedy, he made one last attempt to persuade Hannah to return. He showed up at her parents' house with flowers and toys for the children. However, Hannah refused to even speak with him, and Lloyd asked him to leave immediately. At that moment, Rowan lost all self-control. He began to scream, accusing Hannah and her parents of ruining his life. This incident ended with yet another call to the police, but Rowan managed to leave before they arrived. A day before the tragedy, he posted on social media a message that would later be regarded as a sinister omen. In this post, he spoke of betrayal and the pain of having the people you love turn away from you. None of his followers, including friends, perceived this text as a signal of the impending catastrophe. During those days, Hannah felt particularly despondent. She confided in her mother that she feared for her children, yet she endeavored to maintain a facade of calm for their sake. February 19th, 2020 began like any other morning for Hannah Clarke. She rose early, assisted her children in preparing for school, and made breakfast. Little Aaliyah, Liana, and Trey joyfully discussed the day ahead, while Hannah tried to focus on these happy moments. Despite the wait of recent months, around 8 a.m., Hannah loaded the children into her Kia Sportage, parked near her parents' home, as they were set to head to school. As she pulled onto the road, her attention was drawn to movement in the rearview mirror. It was Rowan. He was following their car, waiting for the opportune moment. He knew Hannah's route by heart and had pre-selected a location for the attack. Turning onto Raven Street in Camp Hill, Hannah halted her vehicle at a red light. It was then that Rowan seized the opportunity. He drove up in his car, leaped out, and rushed towards Hannah's vehicle, holding a canister of gasoline. Before Hannah could react, he doused the car with a flammable liquid through the window and struck a match. The flames engulfed the vehicle instantaneously. Inside, screams erupted. Hannah and her 3 children found themselves trapped in a fiery snare. Witnesses reported that Rowan blocked the doors to prevent anyone from escaping. Bystanders nearby immediately noticed the fire and rushed to the burning car. They attempted to help, but the flames spread too rapidly. They managed to pull Hannah out, who miraculously managed to open the door and escape. However, her body was nearly entirely engulfed in flames. Hannah cried out, "He poured gasoline on us. He's set us on fire." Her words shocked everyone present. People tried to comfort her, call for an ambulance, and do everything possible to assist. However, the children in the back of the car remained inside. The fire was so intense that approaching the vehicle was impossible. Rowan made no attempt to flee. Instead, he stepped back and inflicted a fatal stab wound upon himself. His body was found nearby when emergency services arrived. Hannah was rushed to the nearest hospital in critical condition. Doctors diagnosed her with burns covering 97% of her body. Despite the medical team's efforts, Hannah succumbed a few hours later. She fought for her life until the end, but her injuries were incompatible with survival. The 3 children, Aaliyah, Liana, and Trey, perished at the scene. Their deaths represented an irreplaceable loss for the Clarke family and sparked a wave of grief across Australia. This tragedy shook not only those who knew Hannah personally, but also thousands of strollers who learned of the story through the news. Flowers, toys, and notes began to appear at the site of the tragedy. People from all corners of the country expressed their condolences to Hannah's family, condemning violence and the system's failure to protect her and her children. Meanwhile, an investigation commenced. The police confirmed that the attack had been meticulously planned by Rowan. Additional canisters of gasoline and knives were found in his vehicle, indicating his intent to carry out his plan to the end. This was a crime committed by a man who could not accept that he had lost control over Hannah. News of the tragedy in Camp Hill quickly spread throughout Brisbane and then across Australia. Television channels, newspapers, and social media covered the story, expressing shock and sorrow. The story of Hannah and her children became a symbol of the horrifying consequences of domestic violence that had been ignored by society for far too long. Lloyd and Sue Clarke, Hannah's parents, learned of the incident almost immediately. They were devastated. The death of their daughter and 3 grandchildren left them in a state of shock. Social media was flooded with posts bearing the hashtags #Hannah Clarke and #Stop Domestic Violence. Thousands of people shared their stories and called on the government to reform laws protecting victims of domestic violence. This marked the beginning of a significant public movement, demanding immediate action from authorities. The police began their investigation right after the tragedy. The first step for investigators was to reconstruct the events of that day using eyewitness accounts and surveillance footage. It was evident that Rowan had meticulously planned his actions. He purchased gasoline at a service station hours before the attack and left farewell notes found in his home. In them, he justified his actions by blaming Hannah for destroying the family. Investigators also examined his communication history with Hannah over the past months. The messages he sent were filled with threats and manipulation. In them, Rowan repeatedly asserted that Hannah had no right to deprive him of his family and that he would go to any lengths to achieve his goals. In the course of the investigation, relatives, friends, and acquaintances of Hannah were interviewed. Her parents recounted that Hannah had repeatedly expressed concerns about threats from Rowan, yet her reports to the police did not result in significant action. Hannah's friends confirmed that she lived in constant fear, striving to provide her children with a normal life. The investigation revealed numerous vulnerabilities within the domestic violence victim protection system. The restraining order intended to safeguard Hannah proved ineffective. Violations of the order were documented, but they did not lead to serious consequences for Rowan. This case compelled society and the government to acknowledge that existing measures were insufficient to prevent violence. Experts in domestic violence advocacy issued statements calling for stricter laws. Among the proposals were increased accountability for violating restraining orders, more thorough handling of threats, and providing victims with access to safe housing. Following the tragedy, Hannah's parents launched a campaign to raise awareness about domestic violence. They established the Small Steps for Hannah Fund, which began engaging in educational and charitable projects aimed at assisting victims of violence. The fund's mission encompassed not only supporting the affected, but also preventive efforts to help individuals recognize early signs of abuse. This initiative garnered immense support. People across Australia donated in memory of Hannah and her children. Some movement participants began conducting training sessions for police officers, social workers, and lawyers to enhance their understanding of how to respond to domestic violence cases. After the conclusion of the police investigation, the fate of the case was handed over to the coroner. The coronial inquiry, which commenced several months after the tragedy, aimed not only to officially establish the circumstances surrounding the deaths of Hannah and her children, but also to determine whether authorities could have prevented the crime. This process attracted significant public interest, as many hoped to find answers to lingering questions. During the hearings, the coroner meticulously examined the events leading up to the tragedy. Testimonies from police officers, friends, and relatives of Hannah, as well as specialists in victim protection, were heard. A crucial part of the investigation included recordings of phone calls, emails, and messages that Rowan sent to Hannah. These materials vividly illustrated how the threats and manipulations escalated. Key evidence comprised recordings of Rowan's conversations with his friends and colleagues. In these discussions, he openly expressed his anger, stating that he would not allow Hannah to win. His words, which might have initially appeared as mere emotional outbursts in the context of the tragedy, revealed his intentions. Particular attention was given to how the police and judicial system responded to Hannah's appeals. The hearings uncovered numerous shortcomings in law enforcement's actions. For instance, it was revealed that Rowan violated the restraining order against Hannah at least 5 times, yet none of these violations led to his arrest. Moreover, he managed to convince some police officers that he was merely trying to mend relations with the family. This fact incited outrage among Hannah's loved ones and the broader public. The story of Hannah Clarke and her 3 children, Aaliyah, Liana, and Trey, left an indelible mark on the hearts of millions. While the pain of loss for the Clarke family was unimaginable, their strength and determination to transform tragedy into a lesson for society became a catalyst for change. This chapter is dedicated to how the memory of Hannah and her children influenced Australian society, laws, and attitudes toward the issue of domestic violence. Hannah Clarke and her children left behind not only profound sorrow, but also a powerful legacy. Their tragedy became a catalyst for change, enabling many victims to find protection and preventing potential crimes.